Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show lined up for you all today. I'm really excited to bring Jim here, Big Jim, as Seb likes to call him on, of course, Monday, the days of La Voix.
God, stop.
Jim, thanks for being here, brother. It's awesome. Seb has told us all kinds of things about you. So just be aware.
Hopefully good.
Yeah, all good. all good. Yeah. And one other thing that you could do that's good out there, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. It helps us algorithmically. Shaun, he does not like me using that word. So any thoughts today? We have an awesome, well, actually, before we get into that, Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, that kind of little 30-second, who am I?
Well, I currently work for the RCMP senior manager. Seb and I go way back since I think 2008. I used to be on the team with him. Prairie boy, I guess. Grew up in Saskatchewan, lived in Labrador, and currently live in BC. So.
Nice. That was very clean brevity. That's what I gotta say. I like it.
More importantly, Jim, thanks for your service. And
Thank you.
I have heard from Seb that you are a fantastic leader and the utmost professional. And so coming from Seb, that's high praise. So thanks for everything that you do.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you as well.
So I have a general idea of what I want to talk about, but I'm going to put it to the floor. Is there any thoughts, anything percolating, any questions that you guys have for one another?
I got something for you guys, quite interesting, that just percolated a couple minutes ago here. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of this. And I think, and the reason why I want to talk about this is because it is of interest, and I kind of beat myself up a little bit for not doing more about the situation until it transpired today. So long story short, a couple weeks ago, I had the girlfriend's son was mentioning a car going into the complex where we live, and described by a 6-year-old as acting suspiciously, kind of looking around and driving around and stopping to steal some rocks or something, like some stones on the ground on one of the units. And over the course of a couple days and couple weeks, that car was seen again doing the same thing. So they, as in their kids' minds, thought that this car was obviously after the rocks and taking the rocks and putting them in the car and loading them up. So what I did is I said, as soon as you see it, you call me, I'll come out. I need you guys to take the license plate number. I need you guys to take the color and the make of the vehicle and the description of the people that are in it, if you can. And so there's 4 kids. I briefed them all and I said, your mission is to get all this information. Sure enough, a couple days later, one of the little girls across got a plate number off of him, and I asked her to give it to me, and she said, yeah, it's at home, so I'll give it to you, whenever or whatever. Long story short, today there was an attempting child luring in the complex, a car matching the description. That's like now a couple months later, and of course, so I'm like, yeah, we have the license plate for that car, we're good to go. So I call the girlfriend, I say, call this little girl and get the license plate. And she's like, I deleted it, right? She never communicated it, deleted it. So, and my bad for not knocking on the door saying, give this to me immediately, kind of thing. I guess the way everything was described, it felt as though this guy was, potentially doing some landscaping at his place and stealing from somebody, right? So it wasn't like super high on the radar, but actually what it looks like, obviously they were doing is actually looking at the kids and trying to find an opportunity to get the kids. And so, just, I guess, if I look back at this, it should have been an immediate action where, like, get that license plate, get the license plate in and follow up on it at the very least for information, so that if something happens and a car matching the same description with the same people in it, they already have a license plate, they already have an occurrence report on that. And sometimes it's hard to know if something is worth reporting or not. But calling the non-emergency line and having that conversation in a complex full of kids would have made a ton of sense. And that ball was dropped right here. So yeah, just we'll start with that. And thankfully, nothing happened today. It wasn't successful. And so we're going to follow up on that. But yeah, it literally just came through about 5 minutes ago.
That's a tough one. Oh man, I guess really the question in there is, how do we get through the general complacency of the daily life and recognize when something is worth tracking down?
Mm-hmm.
Is that about where we're sitting?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that the behavior concerned me enough to have to brief the kids, to have them take the information, to make sure that they call me if they saw it again, and all this good stuff. And so definitely there was a hunch there, right? And I think sometimes we talk ourselves out of our instincts. I know I do, because I have a tendency to look at things from the lens of somebody that's been a cop for 20 years. So sometimes I think that I may be tinting my view of things, right? Whereas in this case, everything seemed to indicate that he had no interest in the kids. Like, he didn't really pay him any attention as far as the kids were concerned. And he was really concerned with getting these rocks in these bags he was loading. But, and I'm not suggesting maybe those two things are separated. We haven't ascertained any of that yet. But what I am saying is, I should have been sort of thinking a bigger picture. And so it's just something to remind parents out there and people, just if you have a hunch, man, like, make it happen, obtain the information, and keep it and pass it on. Because had this turned the other way today, I'd be having a very different conversation right now. If kids were missing right now,
Yeah, I got a couple of thoughts. So the first thing was, as you described it, my brain went to, I wonder if he's lifting up rocks and dropping things underneath the rocks, like, some sort of a drug or what have you, for later pickup by someone in the neighborhood, etc. Which I suppose is a weird thought, but that's what entered into my mind. But the fact remains that whatever was going through my head and whatever was going through your head, there was something going through our head that was signaling, this just doesn't make any sense. And so what you did is super cool, and I wish more parents would do it, is you created a little team of Avengers. The Avengers. You got 4 kids together, gave them the task, described the mission. Now they're collecting license plates. Now, punch, buggy, no return. That's a fun game. But you know what another fun game is? Defending your neighborhood. 100%. But in a good way, not in an uncool way. And so you'd recruited a little team of Avengers. They got on the task. They collected the mission. They had a little win for the team. But now we're at a point where, because there wasn't follow through by any parties or whatever, it doesn't matter where it slipped through the crack. We're now at a point where the Avenger team needs closure on it, because now this has happened, and now you can explain in an after action report to the team how to do it better next time, or what we should have learned, or yada. You can create a cool team in your neighborhood even this afternoon.
For sure. And then it goes beyond that, because we have a tracking history, right? So because of the conversations that we've had, we're able to ascertain certain facts, like what did the occupant look like, what the color was the car, what brand was the car. So all that information we have, right? All that information we have now. So that gives us something to go on as far as going back to law enforcement and having those conversations. And so it's obviously not a complete waste. And for the kids, definitely it's a win, right? And the fact that nobody was taken is what makes this an acceptable outcome, right? But yeah.
Jim, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, just a quick thought. Complacency versus vigilance. That's where's the happy medium, so you're not paranoid all the time. But it is easy to get complacent in this day and age with everything going on in the news. BC is a busy place. It is hard. I respect what Seb did there, and just recognizing that it may be something and maybe nothing. But in this day and age with all the electronics and the ability to record data, doing something and reporting it is important, because it may not be an immediate response by police, but at least we have that information. It's not overly onerous to keep or input. So.
It reminds me, this is like a separate issue, but it kind of happened to me in my last neighborhood, where the issue started with a bike being stolen, right? And it was one bike, but it wasn't reported because it was an old bike and nobody really cared about it. Okay, cool. And then another bike was stolen, and then a third and a fourth, and nobody was reporting them though. It was just continually happening. And so it kind of went around the neighborhood. Oh, make sure you lock your bikes up and make sure you put your stuff away because, we've had a rash of thefts. And then a car window got broken into, and then another one. And then even then there was no reports because the people at the time were saying, well, it's not really enough to get the police involved. It's just, maybe it's some kids doing some crazy stuff. These are one-time off incidences. But we said it right before the show. It becomes a trend, right? And you can see that the level of violence is increasing if you're starting to break stuff on top of that. And then, luckily, what happened was it was an attempted home invasion, and there happened to be a unit in the area. The occupant of the house called immediately, and the person ran. But it was the same setup. It was the same time frame, same type of person that they, same description of person that they. So it was these types of things build, and it's really easy to just, as you said, kind of talk yourself out of it. So how do we? I guess how do we not talk ourselves out of the bigger issues? How do we at least see it as it's worth talking? If I'm thinking about it in my own head, it's worth following that path. How do we get ourselves to do that?
Yeah, and we just do it. I mean, it's there's no real magic pill. I mean, I as soon as this had been identified as an issue, at least more than twice, I started asking all kinds of questions, and and at that point, we really didn't have much to go on. It was like, well, he stopped by and grabbed some small rocks out of a bedrock, right? Like, okay, dude, and they look good, so they might be expensive. I don't know, right? Like, so for me, right away, I went to, well, maybe somebody is doing some work and and needing it. But the problem is that was just a false pretense on account of trying to be close to the kids or whatever, and whether or not the kids perceived it as being threatening. It really is irrelevant. So as soon as we formulated a plan, we should have, once the license plate was obtained, this should have been an immediate action. It's like, knock on the door, get the license plate from her before she's being a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old and things go missing, right? And you're going to miss that opportunity. So just a really good learning experience. Thankfully, nobody was hurt on this one, and we have obviously things to move this along. So it's not a complete waste, but man, outcome be different. This could have been a really bad day.
Indeed,
for this guy too.
Well, this lends the question, actually, if we dive into it a little bit more, is when you see yourself make a mistake, or when you see yourself, like, there's always going to be a line between vigilance and complacency, obviously, but I think that there's a deeper thing to this, is that you saw yourself make a mistake. Like, you saw a consequence from an action or an inaction, and then you said, you kind of beat yourself up about it a little bit. But how do we get through that? Because that's a really interesting psychological question, is that anytime you make a mistake, anytime you fail at a task, anytime you think you should know better, or et cetera, whatever, that's one of the most difficult portions of life, I think, for a lot of people, is that they hit that wall, they hit that mistake, and then they fall apart, or they start beating themselves up, and it extends. The lesson isn't learned for a longer period of time because they spend so much time smashing up on themselves. So any thoughts on getting through that portion of it as well?
Yeah,
to like see that movement.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's no factor, right? Like, I should have done better, and I know better, period, right? And so now is, how do I do better and know better next time, and how do I brief the kids in a different way, so that next time we're considering the potential ramifications of anything that has that looks suspicious to them, so to speak, right? So don't discount anything that you think might be suspicious. Make sure to let us know, right away, and then right away take some actions, right? Like, and so, I won't be spending 3 weeks fretting on that, because because the outcome was what the outcome was, right? And even if it wasn't, there's nothing I could do. Like actually, like I would have to continue moving forward. Like there's no options of me to just sit here and rock in my rocking chair, thinking about. I mean, actions were insufficient, right? Like, and it's hard to know if you're as a guy that spent so long in law enforcement. It's really hard to know if you are being paranoid, right? Like sometimes, and it's a possibility. And if it is, as Jim mentioned earlier, there's so much going on. You're going to spend your entire life thinking that everything is suspicious. You'll be taking license plate left, right, and center. You'll be following, people when they drive by. You'll be, so it's kind of like a bridge the gap, right? But for me right now, this was thankfully a big learning experience for myself and for the kids and for everybody involved, including the person that's hopefully going to go to jail.
Yeah. Shaun or Jim, you got any thoughts on where we're going with this?
Yeah, just something Seb said there. It's not an issue for Seb. I don't think it's probably an issue for anybody in this group to just move past it and get going. But yeah, I think for the average person, that inoculation of failure is probably not there. So there is some work that has to be put in to get past that. I don't know what the answer is. It's going to be very dependent on the individual, but someone is going to have to channel their inner sociopath or just a little bit of it to get past that and move it. So that's a tough one.
Shaun, anything?
Yeah, listening to Seb, he formed the pattern. He did everything that he had to do. He did everything right, in my opinion. His lifetime of experiences allowed him to get to this conversation right now and pass on the wisdom of the moment. And so we can all spend our life second guessing ourselves. I don't have enough life left to second guess all of the second guesses that I've made. And so like Jim said, and like Seb said, for me, this would be a non-factor, because I know that I was doing my best at the time to form the pattern, doing my best to follow up on it. And if I didn't follow up on it for whatever reason, then I was doing my best at the time. I was busy with something else, or whatever the case is. I can't go back and change time. So I'm not going to beat myself up over the past, as long as I know I was doing my best at the moment.
I like that. The I guess then the real question is, as you said, Seb, paranoia, right? How do you know when something is something? Because the world is large and people do weird stuff, right? Like, sometimes somebody wants a rock. Okay, cool. Take a rock. But when do you go, now it's an issue, versus, what do you think? I'm going to put Jim on the fire first.
Well, sorry, clear up your question.
Clear up my question? Okay. So the question is it something, I guess maybe I got to kind of compose this a little bit better. Is it the depth of experience that grants someone the ability to say yes or no? This is something I should follow up on versus not? Or do you think that there are people out there that are just paranoid, right? And everything is suspect at all times and just live their life that way? Because you can say that the depth of experience will grant you or will give you the ability to make that decision, but you can also, as Seb said, you got to question whether or not just the experience itself is leaning you in that direction. So I guess that's the question: is it your man, I'm drawing a blank. I had it there.
Yeah, I know. I think I know where you're. I think I know where you're talking about. So I'll take it instead of putting Jim on the fire, because if I'm wrong, then at least I'm wrong. And so there's a few things that you said here that I think are critical. So first things first. We know that humans have an instinct, right? And most of us do, and based on our life experiences and the things we've been exposed to. So that will vary greatly depending on what the exposure has been over time for you. And so that's when perhaps if there is a tracking history, and that is if you are to establish a suspicious behavior, generally there is a tracking history, because these people will come in and will target. They will actually, they will do a sort of a target recce, right? A reconnaissance on objective, and they will try to ascertain whether or not the risk the benefits outweighs the risk. And so it takes time to do that. And this is when the situational awareness / security mechanisms that you implement in your own lives are going to help, because during the planning phase, if you are hardening the target, you are an unlikely target and it will go somewhere else. So this is, kind of one of those. As a person that doesn't have the experience, that hasn't been exposed to what actually could happen, and a lot of people don't, and a lot of people also willfully choose not to know what's going on in the world. As a result of it, actually stifles their ability to be happy and to live, and so I don't necessarily blame them for that. They say, ignorance is bliss. To a certain extent it is, but it's also dangerous, right? And so I think if you have an incline within you that something is off, it is likely that it is off. And if it isn't off, then you may want to confirm that it isn't off, right? And so in this case, there was a tracking history. Had there not been a tracking history, the first time he told me, it was kind of weird, and I would have been like, well, this is weird, but nothing to it really. Once you have 2 or 3 or 4 occurrences, now you're starting to look at a pattern. When that happens, and you're still feeling the same, something has to be done about it. Whatever that something is, if it's speaking to somebody that has more experience, i.e., if it's calling a non-emergency line and in a police office, or speaking to a neighbor of yours that's a cop, or speaking to somebody or somebody else, even just bounce it off other people to validate or to see, to get other views on the same incidents, rather than try to brainstorm with yourself, which always leads to the same thing. You will end up spewing out what it is that's spinning in your head. But if you're bringing other people in, you may and Shaun got it right on when he said public safety is a community responsibility. It's not a police responsibility. It is a community responsibility. So if you're in a complex and there are other people around and the kids are playing outside and all this stuff, have the conversations with the parents. Hey, did you guys see the whatever car that's coming through that the kids have mentioned to me, or whatever the case may be, right? And so I think that if you don't have the experience and the exposure, it could be very difficult to establish, am I paranoid? Am I even knowing what I'm doing? But I think, reasonably, you can only do what you can do with what you know. You can't be expected to do things that are completely outside the realm of your either expertise or character on account of having had the lack of exposure, right?
Yeah. Jim, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, Chance, you, if I'm understanding your question correctly, and Seb alluded to it there, I think just as an individual person, the average person, we have instincts for a reason. They've been developed over time. I would suggest erring on the side of caution and trusting those instincts, because they're there for a reason. And then I guess the consequences of not believing those instincts are greater than trying to be the better person or trying to ignore those instincts. So I think outside of some sort of psychopathy, that there has to be the belief in yourself and trusting your instincts, that what you believe or what you're experiencing is actually true.
I like that. Shaun, you got any thoughts?
I do. It was something that Seb said, I believe, and it was ignorance is bliss. And that's a really cool idea. It's a cool concept, and I'm not even mocking it, though I'd like to. Ignorance is bliss is kind of fun, because you get to wander through the world without a care, or without a concern, or without forming patterns, or without even being able to spell the word paranoid. But the problem with ignorance is bliss is you're at the whim of the world. You're a leaf in the wind, being shaped by a wind that you can't control. And so you have no real agency if you're not looking at the world around you, forming patterns. You're just a victim to it. And so ignorance is bliss is fun until the bliss isn't standing in front of you. The problem's standing in front of you. And it's at that point that you get to figure out some life lessons. And that kind of sucks. But hopefully those life lessons convert your mindset from ignorance is bliss to, I better start figuring a few things out. based on the patterns that I'm recognizing. Maybe I need to armor up with maybe some self-defense, or maybe I need to do some situational awareness training, or maybe I just need to get to know my neighbors a little bit and dial into what's going on in the community. There's lots of ways to evolve out of ignorance is bliss. And the important part of that is now you're shaping your world. You're not a leaf in the wind. You're actually your own little wind shaping your own course. If you can form the patterns and start acting with them, or engaging with them, or being a part of the patterns around you, well, now you're in the game. You're in the game of life, where you're not a victim to whatever life throws at you. You're shaping it to some degree. The more you can be aware of what's going on around you, the more you are controlling your world. If you have your eyes closed, your ears closed, how on earth can you control your environment? And so by being aware, by forming patterns, you're getting in front of the now. You're getting in front of what is coming at you 10 seconds from now. Being able to not be paranoid, but being alert to your real time now is a really important skill. And if you don't know how to do that, you can engage with people who do have good situational awareness, who do have good pattern recognition, who do have the ability to operate in the world and shape it rather than be victim to it. And it's tough to be a victim on the regular if you're not forming patterns. And that, to some degree, is what creates paranoia. And so if you want to counter paranoia, you've got to actively pursue being involved with people who understand the patterns of the world and can shape you to some degree, make you feel more comfortable in it.
Yeah.
I like
Go
that.
ahead, James.
I was just thinking that basically what we've been going over so far is that it's about acting. It's about actually acting. And whether that being talking to your neighbor more, or taking a situational awareness course, or it's just the recognition like, oh, something needs to be done, and then doing something rather than just sitting there and thinking, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's always easier to sit back and and do nothing. And then, as you said, Shaun, you got to deal with the consequences, and you have no experience to deal with them. So I think that's a big part of it, is just the fact of being the one to act. When you think when your body's telling you, hey, man, we should do something about this, do something. Seb?
Yeah, what's interesting with this whole sort of societal sort of times, I guess, that we're in right now, is that everybody wants to be a victim, of life, of the circumstances, but yet when it comes to things that are actually have the potential to truly victimize you, you have your head in the sand on account of, that's not going to happen to me, or, I always get a kick out of when people say, well, how did this happen in our neighborhood? Like, that's, incredible. We live in West Van, or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, man, what planet have you been living in? Because I've been full-time going, running around, grabbing people from all walks of life, from all these different areas, right? We know it's, you're not protected, in your clout of force field in West Van, right? And so, excuse me, it goes to show like how truly strange we are as people, right? Like, okay, so I'm a victim of my circumstances. I'm a victim of this person and that person, and who didn't do what for who and what, and I'll justify my entire life on that. And then there's actual risk factors associated with some things that you could actually yourself could find a victim, or the ones you love could find themselves a victim of, and yet you never even sort of acknowledge that this could be the case. It's kind of like when people say, and God forbid this a diagnosis come to anybody, but when people say, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was shocked. Like, well, 50% of people, between a certain age to a certain age will have that. And if they live to be 80, it's almost 100% of people will have cancer at some point in their lives. How is that shocking to you? I don't understand. Like, if I go to the doctor today and he says, Seb, you got a cancer coming up, yes, it's going to hit me hard, and so it should. And then I'm going to start thinking, what am I doing next? What are my next steps? Depending what the circumstance is. But I can tell you one thing that I won't be shocked. Because why not me? You know? And so it's really interesting how diametrically opposed those two things are, and yet very, very common.
Yeah. Jimmy, I see you taking notes there. You got some thoughts?
Yeah, you said something interesting there. Just go do something about it. I love the sentiment. I just it is, I think, a little more difficult than
there is some nuance to it.
There's some levels to that,
Jim.
for
Thank
sure.
you for please continue.
I think about some idiot driving down the road and me, just as a experienced senior police leader, calling the cops. Am I wasting somebody's time, or should I should I be calling? So if I'm having those hesitations, am I wasting someone's time? I'm sure other people are. It popped into my mind. I'm giving you the corporate spiel here now, but back to the earlier part of the conversation, is that community building is so important. There needs to be that greater community that Seb went out and cultivated on his example there. That it's a responsibility for us to cultivate that in the community and make sure that people are comfortable talking, comfortable reporting, comfortable making that phone call, because without that, everybody just sits there and wonders if they should have done something or should have made that call. So.
Yeah.
And just before you go, Chance, one thing I'd like to add to this is, and I think that's really critically important. If you're in law enforcement right now, if you are in law enforcement, or if you are taking calls, or if you're receiving reports, the way we respond to those complaints and the way we respond to those reports is critical, because it only takes one person to take a call like this and flip it on its head by telling the person, having a negative encounter, so to speak, with police on account of calling the cops for something that was perhaps perceived as being benign, but in their context would have been very difficult to rate the risk. And now they're coming to you and you have this call that you may read the brief on, and you may be the summary on, and you might be, why do you call the cops for this? And now, but your interaction following that is going to create a pattern, whether or not that person will ever call back again when something else happens. And that's a very dangerous game to play. If you are not professional, if you're being impatient, if you think the call is, do your best to be your best, right? So that eventually when that person has another event, they'll remember having called before, and yes, it didn't go anywhere, but at least the police was happy to to respond, or to at least have the information, or whatever the case may be. You've created a positive experience that they can draw upon next time. Do the other way around, and next time they may not have the ability to actually differentiate the amount of risk associated with their new situation, and it might be more elevated, and they decide not to go on account of how they were treated last.
That brings up an excellent point, and I'm going to use myself as an example in a second. We have a great comment from Sam, which is awesome. See you, Sam. Good to have you here. It says, better to look paranoid and be wrong than be right, and let fear of being wrong stop you from saying something. Trust your gut. It's usually right. And I think the thing that keyed on for me on this one was, it's better to look paranoid and be wrong. And I think that is the challenge for a lot of people, right? They don't want to be wrong. So the paranoia portion of it, of like, I don't 100% know that this is going on, so I'm just not gonna, because they just don't want to be wrong, right? And I think that's a big step to get over for a lot of, for nobody here, where they're like, okay, cool, I was wrong, no big deal. But for a lot of people, they struggle.
Hang on a sec. Let's just be careful, because I don't think that way. If you're speaking for me on the panel, I don't think that way.
What I mean that you're not afraid of being wrong.
In moments like this, where if I've got to patternize the world around me, and I'm getting a gut instinct, and I think, oh, hang on a sec, that guy's looking at that young girl the wrong way. If I feel that, I'm now paying attention, and I'm not going to take the casual, sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes I'm right. I'm going to engage in that process and do my best to do the right thing at that time. And whether I manage it well or not is neither here nor there. I'm never going to think about, am I going to be wrong or not? It's not about,
that's not what he's saying, though.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm almost at my point. For me, it's not about failures. You've got to go through failures, and you've got to go through wins to establish your experience level. And if you've only been paranoid once, and in that one moment, you're trying to think about, should I be wrong? Should I be right? I'm not that anymore. I've had too many wrongs and too many rights. And all of my rights have formed a pattern as to how I know how to do this moment right. And so I don't do it wrong too many times now. I do it right way more times than I used to when I first started off with paranoid right or wrong.
I guess what I understood you saying, Chance, was that we, as this panel, don't mind if we are wrong, whereas regular people might shy away from it on account of the fear of being wrong, is what you were saying, correct?
Yes, and I'm rephrasing it so that I'm saying it's not that I'm afraid of being wrong. It's that I know I'm probably right.
Yeah.
Two different things in my mind.
I get
that. It's a great clarification, and I think it definitely needs to be stated is that, and I don't even like saying people like regular people or other people or the rest of the world. I mean those that, when, as Shaun said it, when you've been wrong enough, you're like, okay,
it's inconsequential.
Exactly.
It's like it doesn't change the course of action.
No, exactly. And as to your point, Jim, earlier when I was saying that you have to do something. I mean, just physically do something in terms of make an action towards betterment of the situation. If you think something is suspicious, okay, watch it. Like as Shaun said, that's the action, being more aware. Now I'm gonna keep an eye on that car versus immediately run over and say, hey, what are you doing here? Right? I don't mean that, but the point that I was trying to make on that was it just kind of clicked up in my head there. But so I had a great example of this to your point, Seb, what you were saying earlier about how you interact with the populace in terms of those situations. And growing up, my mom was a hippie, right? She still is, but she was very aware of the police. Growing up, doing the things that she did back when she was 18, she was hitchhiking across the state. Like I'm talking hippie. And the police for her it was immediately a negative association. So growing up, we were always told quite regularly, like, hey, don't do anything bad or the police are going to come get you. So it was a very, maybe a differential type of engagement. And when I saw cops, I got nervous. When I was young, right? I was like, oh, I'm not doing anything, right? And that was because of the fact of my parents kind of teaching me that lesson, because they got nervous anytime they were around police. It wasn't until I was in the Army and I started actually having friends that were in the police and I started seeing them as just human beings doing a job, that optic changed. And now I've taken to the point where with my boys, I go out of my way to point out good things with police. Right? Like we'll see them on the side of the road and be like, oh, look at that guy keeping the road safe, making sure that that guy wasn't speeding or anything like that. But it's just an optics thing and how you interact with the police. And I've gone out and got coffees for police officers sitting in their cars, writing reports or doing whatever. I brought them over and I've made sure that my boys were there to see it because I want them to have a good interaction with police continuously so that when something does happen, I don't shy away like I would have when I was younger. My boys immediately go, oh, we need to talk to police. And I think that's a big optics issue is like, as same thing with you did, Seb, with those kids is that you interacted them, you engaged them in the process of how it works. And you didn't make it a negative thing. You didn't make it a stigmatized thing. It was not a fear-based thing. It was just like, okay, we need to get information. And I really love the fact that is, that's something we need to do more of, I believe, when talking about police, when talking about policing in general, is getting that optic, that pattern down so that the citizenry doesn't fear police.
Yeah, as long as it's followed up on by police, right?
Yeah.
And that's the part I don't like to try to control external factors, right? We as cops have a responsibility, each and every single one of us, and I say us, I mean I'm obviously out, but we have a responsibility to be the representation of not only the organization, but every single person that wears that uniform. Everything you do matters. I don't care if you're on the tail end of a night shift. I don't care if you had 6 hours of in custody. I don't care if you I don't care. Like, be the person that you need to be so that you reflect on everybody, or you reflect positively on everybody else that's working their butt off to try to make it happen. Because every time one of us does something super knuckleheadish, we all wear it. Right. And I go in a bit of a diatribe here, but it's critically important. So yes, you can teach your kids to be, to have that relationship it's going to take one negative interaction to squash years of work. Right.
That's
so we have to take responsibility of that as Leos.
Well,
like
you
that.
are. And you currently are. And Seb, you said that, well, you're not serving anymore in that capacity. And yet you are. So I'm looking at you and Jim as not two ends of the spectrum. I'm looking at you as two guys who've been through the entire spectrum to some degree. Jim's still serving, you are not. But both of you are excellent representations of good policing. Seb, you're out. But you're one of the best representations of Leos that I know. I defer to you as, to some degree, my gold standard of when I've got a question, I hit you up. Because in my opinion, you're the man. And until I meet someone who replaces you, you're doing a fantastic job of representing Leos. And so I don't think the job ever ends to some degree. We might get out, but we never really get out as long as you recognize that you're forming patterns for the future.
Agreed, brother.
That's a great point. The Jimmy, got any thoughts before I jump into a diatribe?
Seb speaks the truth, and he said it more eloquently than I probably could. So well done.
Seb is definitely, he's my gold standard too. So anytime I need anything about policing, I go to Seb. But the interesting thing I find in all of this, and this general discussion, is the fact that we keep referring to the term of either normalcy or finding a pattern or creating a trend based on what we see every day. And there's a couple of statements that I got told very early on in my military career. One of them was, anytime you do anything when you're in uniform, you are no longer you. You are a Canadian Forces soldier, blah. And they said it in terms of a news title because that was what was going to happen. You get into a fight in a bar, it's not Chance gets fight in a bar. Canadian Forces soldier gets fight in a bar with civilian, blah, 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 right? So, and as you said, everybody wears it. Everybody. And so it really lends to being professional. One of the other pieces that I really got kind of stuck in my brain was, as we were getting training for going to Afghanistan, the big thing that we were taught was look for two things. The absence of normalcy. And so you go, well, what, no normalcy? And once you get there, you start to figure it out and you see the pattern of life and okay, this all makes sense. And then, you have a market that is normally semi-busy and there's people moving around and okay, cool. That's a normal day. When all of a sudden no one's in that market, now you need to be aware because something's going to happen. The other part of that was the excessive amounts of normalcy. So if that market is only working on Sundays and Mondays, and now it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, again, something is happening. You are outside normal now, either on either end of the spectrum. And I think that understanding what normal is, obviously, is the first part, right? You have to build your pattern of life. And then once that is extended and you start seeing, oh, wait a second, why is there a car coming in here every day to pick up rocks? Rocks seem odd. Why are rocks odd? Maybe I should do something about this. And I just, but at the same time, if all of a sudden, and I guess that's the real trick is, it's the all of a sudden. If there is a distinct change that should click in your brain, does that sound about right? As if that should be something that people should be aware of. It's not a change over time. It is a right now, things are different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of does to a certain extent. I mean, I'll entertain your point. Like for me, for example, had the kids said to me, say after identifying the potential that person was going on and supplementing their landscaping material with whatever rocks, and they started say, looking at the kids, for example. Like looking at the kids, like, making eye contact or looking to see, just suspiciously gazing at the kids or whatever the case may be. And the kids said that to me and they felt really uncomfortable with that. I would have upped that on the threat scale very quickly. Right. I would have been like, this is in my head is a scenario that, yes, you can what if everything, but this is what people need to understand. When you do risk assessment and when you're doing it all the time, what do you have? what do you have? What is the totality of the circumstances? You cannot act upon what ifing absolutely everything. What if they have a nuclear bomb in there? Let's not do anything, right? Because they can just detonate, right? And then let's just stay out and not do anything. So risk assessment has to be based on reasonable parameters. It has to be based on the things that you know that make it reasonable and the totality of the circumstances. And so having a little bit of information as, what something to lead me to believe that he was actually not, that the rocks were a byproduct of him or them or whatever trying to target the kids, it would have been a very different approach. And so I think, it just kind of needs to be identified. And that's a professional trait, right? Like if you don't have that, that's going to be very difficult to see some of the nuances that are attached with that, right?
The more experienced you are, the more you see and feel. If you're stepping into a environment for the first time and you're day one beginner, you don't know how to absorb the bandwidth, the totality of the situation. You're not absorbing all of the information in that room or in that building or in that wherever. You can't get all of the bandwidth, and you don't have enough patternizing to be able to build patterns out yet. So a more experienced person doing a threat analysis can step into an area, absorb everything around them like a black hole in several seconds, and then start patternizing what the next steps are. There are levels to the game, as Seb said, and his level is different than the average person's level to be able to determine what the threat is in the moment. So I know that Seb played that this recent incident. I know he played it the way that it was supposed to be played based on he was doing his best effort at the time with all of his mega experience. And no one could have stepped into that moment and done it any better, in my opinion. And so what it should act as a reminder is it's our job all the time to absorb the bandwidth around us, form the pattern, and understand what we're interacting with each moment. When we walk down the sidewalk and we see someone walking towards us, or at least in my world, I patternize them. Within a second, I'm making assessments and patternizing what they're all about. Why they're looking that way, why they're walking that way, why they're holding that thing. I form patterns all my life. And so I don't do it consciously. It just feeds into my bandwidth absorption rate. So I think it's important, if you've never taken the time to look at something carefully and look for the unusual moments or look for the details that just kind of stand out a little bit as not making any sense, start building on those patterning actions so that you can more easily walk through the world and see what's going on to some degree, but not in a paranoid sense, as Jim alluded to, the distinction being that it's a good idea if you're building off experience to understand the world, but if you are doing it in absence of any feedback from good mentors or any feedback from someone who can raise you up through a game of life, then you should be careful not to develop too many weird strategies on how the world turns.
So do you think that like some situational awareness is always good, right? That's a great thing to have. But for those that don't have any experience in terms of situational awareness, what do they do? How do we inform the world, I guess, of and actually this brings up an interesting thought that just clicked up in my head. Was a little while ago we were talking about Mike Glover and the fieldcraft survival videos and all this stuff of like being kind of a bit fear-based. How do we get people to be more aware without scaring the crap out of them and being like, oh, the world is dangerous and nothing is safe, all that kind of stuff? So how do we do that?
You can't control people's reaction to what you are going to say. It's about being moderate, right? Like, because it isn't like if you're in the world of law enforcement right now, 100% of your work is done with 1% of what's actually occurring, if that, right? And so if you're having a conversation with people and you're making it sound like the world is 100% that way, then you fail to recognize that you are surrounded by it as a result of your operational task, right? Your duties, like what you are actually assigned to. It's your job to see 100% of it. But generally speaking, most people aren't going to see that much, right? And so it's important to have a bridge the gap approach where it's not fear-based, but it's reality-based. This happens quite regularly, you know, and you need to at least be aware, because you can at least foresee, anticipate, prepare, or take actions preemptively, ideally, to prevent certain things from happening. I'll give you an example of this, like a blatant example. If you're the type of person that keeps their door unlocked all the time, I got some bad news. You know, you 100% should not. Like, that is always a fail risk. And you know what? You may do it for 20 years and become outcome bias and be like, my doors have been unlocked for 20 years. You're right. But it only takes one time where somebody tries the doorknob and enters the home with your kids. You know what I mean? And so,
well, sorry, just a quick point to interject. Depends on where you live. We're in our little Granola Head mountain town. I'm not going to say whether we leave our door unlocked or not, but generally speaking, it's kind of unlocked. Now, here's the thing, Seb, it's a beautiful point that I just want to state that 20 years ago, maybe you could leave your door unlocked.
Sure.
Your bias 20 years later hasn't taken into account that the town has 10 times in size, and all of a sudden there's a variable that injects a new problem into the town that you're ignoring. Because you're biased to 20 years ago, always leaving your door unlocked. So thank you.
For sure. What I would say to this is this. Doing it 20 years ago probably wasn't a good idea either, but you would get away with
sure.
it, right? Whereas if I look at the cost benefit, what does it take me to lock it? And what am I trying to do by not locking it? Like, prevent myself from having to put the key in it and turn it? Like, you know, okay, so nothing happens or something happens and somebody's in the house. Now, because I didn't want to put the key in and turn it, somebody's in the house, you know, like, so for me, it's all about like a cost benefit. Like, is this costing me more than what the potential ramifications could be? But it is absolutely accurate that if you're in the woods somewhere, and plus Shaun probably leaves his door unlocked anyway for somebody to come in.
Dude, I hope they're in there.
just waiting for it. Like,
I'm tired of paying to go watch John Wick.
My doors are unlocked.
Yeah.
Yay.
You gotta scream it to the
Come
the
victimize me.
Yes.
Yay.
Come, by all means, step into my house. We'll see what happens.
So I know we're getting close, but I want to engage with Jim for a sec here, because the idea being, we're talking about paranoia to some degree, a little bit. And if someone out there is asking themselves, well, am I paranoid? There's a real good way to calibrate against that. Find people outside of your group right now, because if you're in a group and you're feeling paranoid for a while, there's probably nobody in your group that's saying to you, hey, man, you're looking a little paranoid. So, you know, start looking outside of your group to get a sense of people who are really well balanced. And so I want to put an exclamation mark after that, because that's all I've been getting the vibe off of Jim from the get-go. As to me, he is almost a perfect example of someone who holds a space calmly, is really balanced, is paying attention, isn't knee-jerky, is just the right guy for the job, to be able to sit across from someone either in a bar or at an office space and say, how you doing? And whatever that person says next, they're bouncing their ideas off a guy who's holding his space in a really well-balanced way. And so this is what we've all got to look for, is people who are Jims to some degree, so that you can get a sense of your own yardstick, your own calibration. Am I on point or am I off a little bit?
Was there a question in there, or Jim?
No, I paused 2, 3 so that Chance wouldn't say anything, and then maybe one of the panel guests could say something.
Hey, man,
No,
go ahead, Jim.
I'll jump in there. So thank you, but probably misplaced. So appreciate that. You asked, like, how do we educate the population on this issue? I don't know if we need to. I think there's a ton of experience out there. This has kind of gone down a cop and military centric rabbit hole, I think, but we've got firefighters, we've got safety individuals that work in the pipeline, we've got risk managers, we've got security people work at a grocery store. Your hair will pop up on the back of your neck if you're at Starbucks and somebody walks in that's just not right. So I think the experience out there is quite valid and quite robust. I think the channeling of what do you do with that is where we target our audiences. Not everybody knows what to do with that. Yes, you're in the military, you got policing, firefighting, you got a system to draw from, experience to draw from. I guess how do we educate the populace is figuring out a method to draw that experience that already exists out there and then put that in a package, and potentially just experience or exposure. But I think there's all the interactions that Seb was talking about. Seb's group now has a system that they can, they've learned from this incident. They can draw upon that and understand now how to put those pieces together better than they did before. So
I like that. I guess really that's it, right? You have to have the experience. You got to be able to experience these things, or at least, because it draws the question in my head, and I know we're running short on time here, but I've been asked this a number of times: is the world that much more unsafe, or is it that we see more stuff, right? Is it that we have the access to, more of what's happening, or is more happening? And so it's a tough question. I've always thought it was more the fact that we have social media and we're exposed to more now. But do you think that there is, you think that maybe we're just we're shown more without any actual experience? Or do you think it's more that things are just happening more often?
Both. I think, one, we definitely see it more often. But two, we also perhaps generate some things more frequently than we would before because of that exposure. Mm-hmm. So someone who is thinking about an issue may not have been inclined to go act on that issue, but now that they see it in social media or see it more frequently, they may be inclined to go act that way as well.
I like that. Seb, any thoughts?
Yeah, I do believe it's a combination of the two. I do believe that from a data standpoint, we are in different times. The propensity of weapons, the propensity of using them, that type of things has definitely increased. And the reasons behind that we're not going to get into in the 2 minutes that we have left, but there's so much behind that. And also the information is a lot more readily available. So now you have a sort of a compounding effect where you're actually seeing more and more is occurring. So now it looks like it's 10 times more kind of deal. But there's some pretty alarming stats on major urban centers, especially with a crime growth, over the course of, say, the last 30 years, for example, right? And there's a lot of contributors to that, but I think we just have to be alive. We just have to be alive to that. And that's why sometimes even it causes issues with, old, retired, crusty, members that will have an opinion about absolutely everything and how we did things and whatever. It's like, man, this is a different world. Like, you couldn't have done half the stuff that you did and get away with it now. And of course, there's a lot of good, old, retired, crusty members. But anyways.
That's a great point, though. I'm trying my best to set up a round two. So this will be a great further conversation as we have 2 minutes left before we got to shut her down. But
didn't we start at like 10 after, theoretically?
Yeah, and it's about 7 minutes after. So
yeah.
It's all good. I can still do math. Yeah,
you're gonna get in the green room.
I'm gonna get it. Don't worry. I do appreciate y'all for the conversation. It's been awesome. But Jim, you got any final thoughts on anything that we have gone over?
No, just appreciate you guys having me, and good first time being here. And I like what you're doing. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Awesome. Seb, any final thoughts?
No, I'm good, man. Thanks a lot.
Shaun, anything percolating other than the hatred for me?
Hatred's such a strong word, at least to the dark side of the force, so I've heard. So what I would like to say is, first of all, Jim, thanks for showing up. Usually it's got a bit of a different feel to it, so hopefully you'll come back for part 2. and we can get to some meat and potatoes on some of the subjects that we've touched on today, which are excellent topics. And I really appreciate you bringing your broad-ranging experience to today's conversation. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been our pleasure having you, and I will do my best, as always, to have a round two. As we all learn how to do this better, as we all build upon it, as we all grow together, we can do that here every day on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Gmo.